has Labour been accused of spreading fake news about economic doom and gloom when we've got growth figures predicted at 1.8%, 2.5%, 2.1%, 1.9%, and we were the fastest growing economy in the G7 last year? Are you just trying to spread misery for political gain?
Look, if you want to know what's happening with the economy, you just have to look at what the Office of Budget Responsibility has said alongside the budget today. And they've confirmed the growth forecast has been revised downward today alongside the budget. And if you look over the longer term, this is not just about 1 year or 2 years worth of economic data. This is also about looking at what's happened over the last 13 years. And real wages have fallen since 2010 and the decade that followed. And we know that we're in a worse off position now than we have been under the Labour government before. And I think what the government really needed to do today was to set out a credible plan for growth, and that's what they failed to do.
OK, you say that they've failed to set out a credible plan for growth. I mean, a lot of people would say that it's a great thing that what they've done with the pensions. They are obviously trying to keep people in work for longer. I mean, is Labour opposed to that?
Well, look, we need to make sure when we're spending public money that it's value for money and that it achieves the aim that we set out to achieve. And, actually, the only permanent tax cut we saw in the budget today was this tax cut aimed at the top 1% of earners through the pension pot changes. That's the only permanent tax cut which they set out.
Just to pick up on that, then, sorry,
is it value for money? And some of the, but let me just say, you asked about,
no, I need to pick up on that because
£70,000 being spent per person getting back into work.
I've got to push back on that because I thought that the Labour Party really cared about the NHS. I thought that was your baby and you wanted to see it blossom. But the Conservatives are indeed trying to make sure that people who work in the NHS can stay working in the NHS longer. So if you're criticising what you're saying about the pensions only benefiting the wealthiest people, I mean, it's designed to help the NHS. So have you guys stopped caring about that?
Well, look, we know that there's a particular issue with doctors' pensions, and that's something which, I know and other MPs know from our constituents who are doctors, often getting in touch with us to talk about those problems. And, we've said that that needed to be addressed. But the truth is that this is a tax cut, this is a handout which is handed towards the top 1%. But actually, look, you asked about the NHS. We were setting out in the run-up to the budget what the government should do is scrap the non-dom tax loophole and use some of the money saved by scrapping that non-dom tax loophole to fund an NHS workforce expansion plan. That would be really transformational for the NHS. So we care desperately about the NHS, as do people across the UK. And if we really want to get the NHS back on its feet, it needs a proper plan for its workforce, which must involve scrapping the non-dom status and using some of that money to increase the NHS workforce.
Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit like playing Labour Party bingo at the minute, because bringing up the non-doms, again, does make it sound potentially a little bit like you don't really like a lot of wealthy people. Again, I would just push back a bit on the pensions benefits, as it were, for the top 1%. I mean, these are people who have paid these are people who have paid more tax than anyone else for their entire working lives. I mean, why should they be made to suffer again in their retirement?
No, look, can I... You asked about our approach to taxation, and our approach to taxation is one of fairness. It's about everyone paying their fair share. And what we said is unfair about the non-dom tax loophole is it means that people who have a lot of wealth overseas don't pay their fair share of tax. Now, we're saying that loophole should be closed. This is about fairness. This is not about targeting any particular group. It's about making sure that everyone pays their fair share. And if we close that loophole, we could then invest in the NHS workforce, which would benefit everyone across the UK.
If you cared so much about people working in the NHS and public sector jobs, why on earth did Keir Starmer spend half an hour talking about Gary Lineker at Prime Minister's Questions?
Well, look, that's a really important issue about free speech, about
more important than tens of thousands of people outside shouting at you. Public sector workers.
It's one of these situations where you have Prime Minister's Questions immediately before the budget debate, and so I think probably Keir and others knew that a lot of the issues around the economy were going to be picked up in the budget debate that followed. But the issue about the BBC and how we think about that institution and the freedom of speech that people who work on the BBC have, those are important issues for public discourse about important issues of the day. But as I said, you had PMQs, but it was followed by the budget debate, and the budget debate is where issues around the economy were focused on in great detail.
Whilst Prime Minister's Question Time was taking place, there were tens of thousands, according to some reports, hundreds of thousands of public sector workers shouting at that building that you're stood in front of there, clamouring about public sector pay rises. And Keir Starmer will have known that Jeremy Hunt was not going to pull a massive rabbit out of the hat when it comes to public sector pay. And he still chose to go in on millionaire footballer Gary Lineker. Would you have done that?
Well, look, I don't get to pick the questions for Prime Minister's questions, but Keir has made a point of raising an issue which has been talked about by a lot of people across the country in the last few days. And if you're talking about making sure that people in different sectors of the economy get a fair deal at work and get fair pay, that's something Keir's talked about extensively as well. He's talked about the need for the government to get around the table with representatives of lots of different professions, teachers, but also railway workers and all the other industries where industrial action has happened or is threatened. And what Keir has said throughout is that the government should get around the table, have those discussions with workers' representatives, with the trade unions, and come up with deals that help to avoid strikes going ahead.
OK, look, just one more very quick one on the illegal migration bill as well. The latest polls show that 52% of the public apparently back the decision to remove illegal immigrants and block them from returning. Just 16% of people strongly disagree with that. Is the Labour Party in recession in terms of the popularity stakes on this?
No, I think the issue with small boats crossing the Channel is one that people across the UK know something needs to be done about. I think what the big division is in Parliament, though, what the big debate is about, is how we approach that. And we think the government's approach is driven by gimmick, by headline, by plans that won't really work or have the effect, and in some cases might even be counterproductive. Whereas what we set out is that we would target money to go after those smuggler gangs, to go after the people traffickers, to make sure that fewer small boats are crossing in the first place, and so that people don't spend months in limbo in hotels without any return agreements in place internationally.
Good stuff. Look, James, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate your time, honestly, and I do always enjoy our back and forth. That's James Murray there, MP, Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury. Great stuff.